All right, guys. So Greg Miller's interview with Shuhei Yoshida is kicking up a bit of dust. Let's talk about it.
Coming on the GDC show and talking about, look,
Yeah,
we are PlayStation 1 again. We are starting from scratch.
yeah,
We
yeah,
have to
yeah,
build
yeah,
all this stuff
yeah.
up. Back to the work.
Yeah, so and I'm sorry I was wrong. PSVR 2 didn't become PS2. So yeah, you can.
What happened with PSVR 2? What happened with PSVR 2, Shu?
Well, let's move on. The conversations.
Well,
So in that clip, you can see him sort of looking a bit sheepish about PSVR 2, and it doesn't look good, okay? People are reading into it saying this is really bad. This is like a negative assessment of PSVR 2. There's a couple of different reasons for his reaction to these questions, in my opinion. The first is that, yeah, it may be true that he believes that PlayStation bosses didn't really support his vision for VR in the way that he might like, but he doesn't want to slag off his bosses having only just left the company. He's got a bit more class than that, so he's like, let's not talk about that. The other thing is that he's admitted that, yeah, it didn't become PS2 in the sense that it didn't have this meteoric rise in sales and popularity in the trajectory that he would have liked from PSVR 1 to PSVR 2 to mirror the trajectory from PS1 to PS2. So that didn't happen for several different really significant market forces, reasons that Sony would have had no control over, even if it had been supported with this high-level first-party software that people are feeling is missing from the PSVR 2 catalog so far. So, even if Sony had put out, like, say, 5 more first-party VR AAA titles, you can't say that that would have necessarily moved the needle in such a dramatic way that you would have had that meteoric rise in popularity in sales of the headset. There are other things at play rather than just having these high level AAA first party titles, okay, that we are missing. We've had a few. In fact, it is true that PSVR 2 has had more genuine AAA games in its first 2 years than all other VR headsets combined over the last 4 years, possibly 5. The last true sort of AAA VR game on a other headset than PSVR 2 was Half-Life Alyx. Now, the Quest has recently got some really, really high quality games. You've got Batman VR, which is the closest that you can say to a sort of AAA quality, but it is still, it's not modern AAA. That is AAA for VR by VR standards. You have to take down your expectation and your definition of what constitutes AAA to include that in that definition. I mean, that might be a legitimate argument to make, but you have to make those concessions in order to sort of force Batman VR into this category of AAA. Whereas PSVR 2 has legitimate AAA games on it, like Gran Turismo 7, No Man's Sky, Resident Evil 8, Resident Evil 4, and some might even say Call of the Mountain, because Call of the Mountain, let's not forget, is very similar in comparison in terms of structure and gameplay, general structure, to Half-Life Alyx, which is widely regarded as the sort of flagship quality VR title from within the last 5 or 6 years. So PSVR 2 has more true AAA VR games, dedicated VR games, than any other platform in its first 2 years. So Sony front loaded that launch with those high quality titles and added one more later with Resident Evil 4, having paid Capcom to add VR to its AAA title there. So Sony front loaded the launch. We saw what the headset is capable of. And then since then, yeah, we have had to rely on smaller studios, indie studios, to keep bringing us those quality releases. And we do have a huge amount of quality games now on PSVR 2. And of course, everybody knows you, by and large, get the best version of these multi-plat games, usually by a wide margin, on PSVR 2. You get the graphical upgrades and various other advanced enhancements to the games. So it does have a stellar library of games. But there are certain market forces that sort of prevent it making sense to keep funneling hundreds of millions into which would be necessary to create these dedicated AAA VR experiences that we sort of wanted to have, perhaps unrealistically, because to make that investment, you need to be able to recoup it. And the VR market currently is just not big enough to justify that type of investment. So Sony are having to play it safe and do this hybrid mode, which seems to be a more affordable way to bring those high quality modern games into VR, is to add VR modes to existing flat screen games. This hybrid mode, hybrid strategy is certainly the more realistic way to approach it. And hopefully we're going to get some more of those titles. There are certainly some on the way that we know about that are coming. So that will continue to happen. It perhaps hasn't happened at the frequency that we might have imagined it would at the start of the PSVR 2. But again, these are dictated by certain market forces. Like, so the PSVR 2, another reason why it didn't have that meteoric rise in the same way that Shuhei predicted that you would like it to have, to mirror that rise from PS1 to the most successful console of all time, PS2. The reason that didn't happen at a steady, quick rate is because the other options changed on the market. When PSVR 1 first came out, standalone VR was not a thing. Quest was not a thing. It hadn't taken off yet. Quest 2 wasn't out yet. It was a very small part of the market. It wasn't developed and there wasn't a huge amount of games on it. So PSVR 1 had this little window of being the best and cheapest option on the market. So it had less competition at that time, and it had a great selection of games by the end of its lifespan. Of course, Sony sort of tried to work their way into the VR market by cobbling together previous technology. They made some concessions here and there, but they ended up with a fantastic headset for its time, based on what it could afford to do realistically, and they made it work. And but since that happened, by the time PSVR 2 came out, standalone had taken off. And of course, Meta, with their infinite pockets, infinite resources, basically, financial resources, were able to subsidize the Quest to sell it at a loss and sell this standalone headset, which by then had a decent enough catalogue of games that made it more, desirable by that point. Quest 1 was really just a sort of test run. By the time Quest 2 was out, it became dominant because it was subsidized, because it was cheaper, because you didn't need anything else to run it. So it was the obvious choice of a headset for people that just wanted to dip their toe in this unfamiliar tech of VR. So it's a big commitment. It's an unfamiliar tech and has lots of sort of hurdles to entry, lots of barriers, lots of potential reasons that people might not gel with it and not actually find it comfortable or able to play it. So it's a risk, this unfamiliar tech. So it's obviously going to be the cheapest headset is going to be the one that sells the best. It's the obvious choice as a gift for parents to buy their children and stick it under the tree. You don't need anything else. Out the box, it works. And it's the cheapest option. So of course it blew up. And that was the market to which PSVR 2 found itself coming into. Not only that, of course, you had the pandemic and everything else that went along with it, the economic problems that were caused for a lot of people, inflation, people had less disposable income. So again, these economic pressures put on people, if you wanted to experiment with VR, made it even more likely that you're going to go with the cheapest option if you were unfamiliar to it. So yeah, for PSVR 2, you needed a PS5, which is expensive as well and difficult to get hold of for the first couple of years. By the time PSVR 2 came out, it was starting to be more readily available. But it certainly was the case that the growth of PS5 was stunted for the first couple of years. You didn't have as large of an install base as you might otherwise have had that console been readily available from launch and through the 2 years leading up to the release of PSVR 2. So you had these several different barriers to entry, not only getting hold of a PS5, being able to afford a PS5 as well as the headset on top of it. PSVR 2 obviously more expensive than Quest, but it obviously was more feature rich. Sony was selling it closer to production cost, and so that was the different landscape that PSVR 2 found itself in. So I mean, it's about realistic economic situations and factors, economic factors that play into how we've seen PSVR 2's lifespan sort of evolve in the first couple of years. So it didn't sell gangbusters straight. I mean, it did the first few months, of course, but those that were hyped for it and it bought it, of course, and it sold really, really well in the first few months. Then it dipped off. But again, it comes down to the money, the damage to people's wallets to be able to take that leap and have a go and take a risk on VR. Because when PSVR 2 was put on sale, it rose by 30 times its sale figures. It started selling 30 times more than it was when it went on sale. So the demand seemed to be there. It's just a case of people needing it to be that magic price to think, all right, now I can have a go and I can take this risk and try this unfamiliar tech and see if I get along with it. So this isn't making excuses for Sony. It's being realistic about the situation that they found themselves in with this tech that they had put. Because the reason I feel compelled to sort of make this point is that because of this interview and similar sort of analysis, people are taking it to mean that Sony don't care. They just don't care. They're just going through the motions with PSVR 2, right? Sony are 2 generations deep into VR, and they are the only major console manufacturer that is doing VR. They have innovated with industry-leading features that are still not in VR headsets across the board. We are still waiting for other VR headsets to catch up with the things that Sony has included in PSVR 2 that are surely essential for the future of VR. Things like eye tracking, which can boost performance so hugely by enabling dynamic foveated rendering. You know, the boost to performance eye tracking gives is huge. And imagine if that was an industry standard feature across all headsets. The gameplay features that studios would be including in their games if they knew that all the headsets had eye tracking. You know, we've seen how amazing that is in Synapse with the telekinesis, using your eyes to select things and then to select things and then be able to manipulate them. So immersive. It made you really feel like you got a superpower. One of the coolest VR experiences you can have because of eye tracking. So gameplay features, performance enhancements are amazing for eye tracking. Headset haptics add so much to immersion. Resistive triggers and all of those other immersive features that PSVR 2 has that we're waiting for others to catch up with. So Sony has made that investment and future-proof this headset so that they can play the long game with it. They've just opened it up to PC, another market that is embracing it now because they can see the benefit of it, and that for one, on PC at the moment, although they don't have all the features enabled, they do have the OLED screen. So PC VR gamers are appreciating the fact that this OLED screen, the most affordable OLED VR headset, is just makes game worlds pop so much. You know, HDR contrast and true blacks just really make game worlds more tangible, and in VR that counts for a lot because it makes just worlds feel more real. So it's become a valued headset in the PC community. So they're making moves now to try and expand its appeal. They've had it on sale twice recently. The sales went through the roof when they did that. Hopefully they'll see that means that, you know, the demand is there. They should really try and keep it at that price and make their money back on the software sales, because of course Sony take 30% off every game sold on the store. So even if they sell this headset at a loss, which may be the correct strategy moving forward, you just need to get it in homes. And then once you have this larger install base that are buying games to the point where it makes sense to invest huge amounts of money in those high quality games, that will snowball. And we're already seeing the fact that, you know, a lot of studios have come out saying that they sell more copies of their games on PSVR 2 than on Quest, despite the fact that it's got a much smaller install base. Might be something to do with the fact that, as I was saying before, you know, the Quest being a perfect gift headset there's a large percentage of Quest headsets bought by parents for the children. They're not buying games, they're playing the free games like Gorilla Tag and VR Chat. And anyone who's tried to go into Gorilla Tag will know it's always populated by screechers. A lot of kids, the kids are playing the free games. They're not buying games. They don't have their own money to do that. So studios, it's therefore no surprise that studios are reporting that they are selling more copies of their games on PSVR 2 than on Quest. And this narrative is repeating. Most studios are saying this all the time. So that's good news. That's positive news for PSVR 2, despite the fact that it has so many different barriers to entry, like needing an expensive console to run it on, it being more expensive most of the time than the other headsets, it not being portable, it having the wire that people seem to have a problem with still. But the optics are difficult to combat there. Sony are really at the back against the wall with PSVR 2 because they're having to go up against, again, Quest, which has Meta's infinite money, that are marketing it everywhere, and they can really ram home this idea that standalone, that wireless has all these benefits. But of course, we know that it's there's pros and cons to both sides. You get your wireless headset. Most people are having to stop playing every hour and a half just to charge the thing, which I'm sure is annoying. A lot of people play the Quest plugged in to avoid that anyway, so it negates it being wireless. Having to be stuck on PS2 era graphics, maybe early PS3 era graphics sometimes. Some of the games are starting to look a bit better, Batman, for example. But most of the games on the Quest platform have this sort of very simple look to them, which again doesn't bother kids. But if you're someone who really wants that next level experience and you've been into VR for a while, PSVR 2 is the cheapest way to get into high-end, truly next-gen VR with modern-looking graphics and true AAA quality. So, so the hardware features are there. Sony have committed to these future-proofed hardware features, front-loaded its launch with a selection of true AAA games showing what it can do, funding third-party developers to add VR to their modes, funding independent studios to finish their games like Legendary Tales, putting money into upgraded versions like Song in the Smoke. So they have been putting a lot of money into it. But again, it's just about being realistic about where Sony are right now and what they can justify to the purse holders based on projected sales. So if they were to continue loading in tens, maybe hundreds of millions into funding high quality AAA first party titles that weren't going to be able to make their money back at this stage, it's going to be harder then to justify continuing their VR involvement in the future. So they need to make it profitable, they need to make it sustainable in order to justify continuing in VR. And I think that's the perspective that people lack when they criticize the perceived shortcomings of PSVR 2 or the perceived lack of investment. They're not taking into account the harsh sort of business decisions that are having to be made to justify its continuation. Because if they put PSVR 2 development into the red by hundreds of millions, and again, you could do that. You could make 5 amazing AAA VR titles, exclusives for PSVR 2. Does not guarantee that headset would then sell to the level that would be needed to make enough money back to justify having done that investment. So they are letting it grow naturally, and it is doing, as we've seen. The demand is there in these recent sales, and they're helping other studios to bring the best versions of their games onto PSVR 2. And we'll see where it goes. I'm very confident that we will see some more first-party involvement, some first-party software. They are said to be enabling hand tracking on PSVR 2, which we never thought we'd see. So I think the future is really good for PSVR 2. I think it's just a case of, being realistic about where we're at. And Sony, and that's before you even take into account the huge disruption to Sony recently with its terrible set of decisions based on, this tunnel vision that they had on live service games over the last several years that has now collapsed. They have wasted hundreds of millions on a strategy that they thought would be profitable. Maybe it was short-sighted, whatever it was. They have suffered from that. It's been turbulent within Sony recently, and large studios, large flat screen studios have been affected too. So it's not just VR that has taken a hit in terms of its potential. It's the whole of Sony's software development strategy has taken a hit because of bad decisions. This whole generation has been stunted because of that. So it's just where we're at, and it's a shame. We've certainly missed out. We might well have had some amazing content that we're not going to get now because of those bad decisions. It's just a wider perspective to see where we're at, really. And yeah, it's not where we want it to be. It's a shame. But it doesn't mean we need to be... I think there's a lot of doom mongering going on, a lot of negativity, and it's just... that doesn't contribute well to the optics as well, because most of this is optics. When it comes down to it, you buy a PSVR 2, you can have a selection of well over 50 top quality, amazing games, another 100 really good games. And depending on your taste, there's a great library of games. The rest of it is optics and the conversations that are being had. So that doesn't help with the trajectory of this headset, which we know has the hardware, it has the capability, and we still haven't yet seen the absolute best of it, because PS5 Pro is proving that there is yet more can be squeezed out of that headset. So just that speaks to the fact that this thing is future-proofed. And even though it doesn't have the highest resolution of all VR headsets, the fact that when you use certain things like eye tracking, and the fact that it's got the OLED and HDR can really create some of the most impressive visuals in VR, and that will only get better when this thing is fully taking advantage of PS5 Pro, for example, and potentially even PS6. See, that's how long the PSVR 2 could be lasting for Sony. They really could be intending for this thing to last through PS6 as well. Because, we're still being impressed by some of the improvements to performance on things like No Man's Sky on the Pro that we didn't think was... We didn't think that game could get any more beautiful. And we are seeing that that headset can outperform even what we thought was its limits based on where it's running off. One of the benefits of obviously running off a powerful console and not a mobile chipset. So you could have a Quest 3 with a slightly higher resolution, but running off a mobile chipset, the games do not look as impressive. Anyway, getting into the reads there, I just think that this interview with Shuhei Yoshida, again, to circle back, I think it means he doesn't really want to start slagging off his bosses after having only just left. But it also could mean that, his projection is he could be acknowledging the fact that his early projection of wanting it to have that same trajectory that PS1 to PS2 had became impossible, because by the time PSVR 2 came out, the market had changed. Standalone had become a viable thing and very popular, and become the cheapest, most accessible option. So where PSVR 1 enjoyed a period of time where it didn't really have a lot of competition, PSVR 2 did not have that luxury. So various different things working against it to negate its chances of having that meteoric rise. Things that could not be affected at all by Sony's putting out more AAA games. Because, again, for the majority of people who for VR is unfamiliar, it doesn't matter if you tell them we've got 3 AAA games or 7 AAA games. it's still over $1,000 to dip your toe in and see if you even like it in the first place. Whereas you can go and get a Quest for 200 quid. So, it didn't, you can't say that it would have made the difference had we seen a huge amount more of first party titles, which is what people usually bring it back to. So I think we've seen a lot of support. I think it's been a fantastic first couple of years for PSVR 2. I'm very excited about where it's going to go. I'm not worried at all. Yeah, that's my take on the Shuhei Yoshida interview there with Greg Miller. All right, guys, tell me what you think. Tell me what you're playing, and tell me what you're looking forward to. See you in the next one. Bye bye.